Okay, welcome back everyone. Greetings for the week. Dr. Klein here to talk to you a little bit about crime and procedures involving criminal trials, and I'm doing so in our very last week before spring break. Yay! A whole week off. I am so excited. I'm sure you guys are as well. But before we really can get to our week's vacation, we need to get past this week's topic and talk a little bit about crime and procedural issues. So this week you had 3 readings and 1 SCOTUS case, and this week you had to read Chapter 9 of the CARP text, the Sherman and Burke piece that came out of 1984, and then the Bushway and Redlich case, or reading rather, that was published in 2011. So this week we're finally getting into what I consider some really good parts of the text, and we're moving away from some more of the social topics, and we're moving towards more of the criminological aspects of the court system. And this week your text does a really nice job of sort of giving you this refresher of the different types of criminal categories and the necessary elements for a behavior to constitute a crime. So things like actus reus and mens rea and causation and concurrence and all that good stuff that we know from criminal law. And since this is basic intro material, I'm not really going to focus too much on the different elements of criminal behavior or the different crime types, but instead what I want to focus and pay more attention to is the idea of the plea bargaining process. And this is both an incredibly important part of the court system and also somewhat a danger to some defendants. And we know that really basically almost all at this point, 97% of our criminal cases are settled through the plea bargaining system. And without it, really what you would see is just a really heavily burdensome court docket, and cases would just keep getting pushed back and back and back, further and further out, because they're just going to get generally more backed up the less we rely on the plea bargaining process. So plea bargaining certainly helps to alleviate some of the strain that the courts face in having to get a defendant to go to trial. And basically those who don't plea out and those who do go to a full court trial process, they're able to do so in a more expedient and a quicker manner. But plea bargaining, involves 2 parties really, and really 3 if you count the judge who approves the plea. But basically this is going to involve a district attorney who is going to make some sort of deal with the defendant and the defense attorney, and basically will say, if you plead guilty to this, then we will do this in return. So sometimes I will give you a reduction of charges or a reduction in the criminal sanction. So if you do this, the death penalty is off the table. If you do this, you'll only get probation instead of incarceration time. Sort of along that line of it. So some of the cases that we're talking about are pretty cut and dry, right? We have you on videotape. We have a confession. We saw you do the crime. There are six witnesses that have all positively ID'd you as the suspect. So it's a pretty cut and dry. There's no real, if you went to trial, your chances of being acquitted would be pretty slim to none, right? So in this case, it might be smart of you as a defendant to actually take the plea. And you get the lesser sentence or the lesser charges or whatever it may be. So those are pretty cut and dry and pretty clear, and allow for the DA to make a deal with the defendant so that that person can avoid a lengthy and costly trial process. So in this instance, the defendant, like I said, is probably better off taking the deal versus going to trial and getting a potentially longer sentence. However, what if the case is not so cut and dry, right? What if the evidence against the defendant is not as clear, but I can't afford a good attorney who can take my case, so I have to rely on the public defender, and because the public defender is so overwhelmed and overburdened, then he or she just recommends that I take the deal and be done with it, right? So what happens if those 6 eyewitnesses are all totally and completely wrong, and they have identified the wrong person because there was confusion that was taking place and they picked me instead of the actual person who did it? Or what happens if they pick me because I'm the only black male defendant, or black male suspect rather, in a lineup, and the other people in the lineup are all 5 white men? Right? What happens then? Of course the witness is going to choose me because I'm the only one who fits the actual racial profile of the person who they suspect did the crime. And this is something that happens all too often, right? What happens if they have me in an interrogation room for hours on end and they don't let me go to the bathroom and they don't give me any food, don't give me any water, and they basically tell me, if you confess and you sign this paper, we'll let you go home and we'll deal with it all later, right? But the question then sort of becomes is, if you really feel that you were innocent or that you didn't do this, why would you confess and plead guilty to something that you honestly know in your heart that you didn't do? But given the circumstances, you feel like you have no way out. And this is something that happens a lot too. Would you confess and plead guilty to something that you didn't do given the circumstances and given the interrogation techniques? You may say no, but innocent people don't confess to things that they didn't do. But this happens all the time, right? Wrongful convictions occur a lot because of a forced confession, right? So one of the things that I encourage all of my students to do, because I think this organization is just a wonderful, wonderful thing, is I want you all to visit the Innocence Project website, and then you can have the opportunity to see all of the different cases that have resulted in a wrongful conviction, either through eyewitness misidentification or a false confession or DNA that wasn't tested properly or whatever, or it might be the result of a plea deal gone bad. So, based on what we know, there are some definite advantages to the plea bargaining process, but it can also, on the flip side, result in some pretty negative consequences for the defendant if things go wrong. So this is sort of the topic that Bushway and Redlich talk about in their 2011 piece, and in that piece they're really examining what the likelihood is that a defendant will take a plea deal given the different circumstances surrounding the case that they're facing. So it's a really good read, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. On the flip side, the other reading that you have for this week, the Sherman and Burke piece, this is actually one of my favorite, and this is a piece that I assign in more than just this class because I think everybody should be exposed to it in some way, shape, or form. But this case, or this piece rather, is a pretty famous case, or I keep saying case, piece, article, whatever you want to call it. And this is something that looks at domestic violence cases in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and it's a pretty famous piece of criminological literature. And you might have already been exposed to it somewhat before in the program if you've taken some of the policing classes already in the graduate program. And basically what it's talking about is policing policies on domestic violence really used to be sort of lax, and there was no mandatory anything. It was more up to the discretion of the police officer, and in terms of the response that was used to break up the domestic situation. So the police had a lot of discretion, and they were basically allowed to either let the family handle the domestic situation, or they could arrest if things got really bad, but oftentimes that was not their go-to sort of response to domestic violence. There wasn't any sort of mandatory policy in place that required the police to remove the batterer or mandatory arrest or anything. So it was more erring on the side of letting the family handle their own problems. Pardon me. So if the police are called and there is no mandatory sort of policy to get the batterer out of the situation, when the police leave, you can understand what sort of response the batterer or the abusive party is going to have in that regard. So Sherman and Burke, they come along and they're interested to really see what's going to happen when you implement different types of response options on the part of the police officer. So would the outcome be different across the board if we had mandatory arrest policies, or would the outcome be different if we allowed police officers to continue to do whatever it is that they wanted to do? So Sherman and Burke, they created this experiment where they're going to randomly assign different outcomes to police officers. So police officers will get one of three possible options, and it's randomly assigned, but they have to do the thing that is written on the card that they are given. So they have one of three options for domestic abuse responses. If they get called to a situation, they have to do whatever the card tells them to do. So they either have to, 1, mandatorily arrest the suspect. They have to, 2, separate the suspect from the situation, or 3, they have to offer some sort of advice or counsel the couple that is involved in the situation. And this often would involve some sort of mediation at the officer's discretion. So, I'm not going to actually review the results of the study, because what fun is that if you guys don't read it on your own? That's your job for the week, and that's something that you're going to specifically talk about in your discussion boards and your writing assignments for the week. And that's also something that your classmates should be discussing and covering in their weekly presentation that will be posted to Blackboard as soon as it's done. So, but I will say about this piece, it's a pretty influential piece of literature, and was something that a lot of departments decided that they were going to start implementing based on the results of what Sherman and Burke found. So it was something that really had a strong impact and started police departments to really take a look at their own domestic abuse policies and see what they could be doing differently based on the results of the Sherman and Burke piece. So really, I'm excited to see what you guys think about it and how that's going to translate into your writing assignments and discussion board pieces for the week. So I am going to leave it there, and I'm going to let you all take over. And just like I always do, this is just a little check-in to see that you guys are on the same pathway that I'm thinking about, and taking the sort of dissecting the pieces of literature and the Supreme Court cases. So next week, obviously, is spring break. Yay, we made it. So enjoy your time. If you're going anywhere, safe travels. If not, I will see you back the following week when we take over in week 10 and we start looking at the criminal trial and its aftermath. So I will see you all then, and have a good break. Bye, guys.